The New York Mets were dealt a huge blow on Wednesday as they lose their closer Edwin Diaz for the entire season, leading to the question, who's the one player the Atlanta Braves can't lose to injury in 2023? I'll answer that question and many others on today's Mailbag episode of Lockedon Braves, so let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I am your host, Jake Mastroianni. You can follow me on Twitter at shortstop. Also, make sure you follow the podcast on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves. Send in any questions, comments, or feedback that you have for the podcast. This entire episode today will be built on those comments and questions as I try to make this show as interactive as possible with you, the listener. Speaking of which, I'm going to go live on Twitch after I finish recording this episode on Thursday night. So you want to come over there and join me, you can go to twitch.tv/shortstopball for the after party of Locked On Braves. Also, if you're new on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe and thumbs up button to help support the show. And thanks as always for making Locked On Braves your first listen of each and every day. We post episodes daily, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and we're free and available on all platforms. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And let's get started on this podcast because we have a lot of great questions. I know I say that every week, but you do a great job of sending in these questions. I don't know how you keep them coming throughout an entire offseason where sometimes it feels like there's nothing to talk about. And yet here we are with another great mailbag episode. But let's jump into the first one here that I have, which comes from Large Lar, who says, do you think TDA should be getting a look at first base to enhance his value? I think it would, and believe he could learn to play the position decent enough. So here's the thing with that. TDA could do it in a pinch. I have, no doubt about that. If everything goes according to plan and everything is working the way the Braves want it to, Matt Olson's going to start 155 plus games at first base. So it's not really something that hopefully you have to worry about. And if you do, and Olson's out for a significant period of time, Braves are probably going to go with somebody else there at first base more regularly and to keep d'Arnaud fresh. I still think d'Arnaud's going to catch a lot of games. I think Murphy will obviously catch the majority and should, because you got him for his defense. You want to let him play back there and catch. But look, could TDA do it in a pinch? Yes. Does he really need to be over there working on it a lot in case he has to take over if Olson gets injured? I don't think so, but it might not be a bad idea. And another way to maybe get his bat in the lineup. And, if Murphy is going to be catching 120 plus games, maybe give Olson a day off, let him DH and put TDA over there at first base. But it's just such a drop off defensively. And I think Matt Olson, again, if everything goes right, he's going to start 155 plus games at first base. Chad says, do the Braves give Max a new deal before the offseason is over or possibly before the season starts? Is it even possible with the other contracts that they've done lately? So a great question. We talked a lot about possible Max Fried extension throughout the offseason. My feelings on it are that it's highly unlikely that the Braves will extend Max Fried. He's a union rep, so he's not somebody who's going to take a team-friendly contract. And honestly, he deserves to get as much money as he can. He's going to hit free agency at 31. It's going to be his only chance at a big payday. And if he pitches anything like he has the last several years now, he's going to make upper 20 million a year, close to 28, 30 million a year. And I don't know that Alex Anthopoulos is going to be comfortable paying that, even with somebody like Max Fried that you feel like will age well. And there's not a ton of concern there, but still you're talking about somebody in their early 30s, paying them close to 30 million a year as a pitcher who one injury and could be out of there relatively quickly. So I think it's unlikely that it happens. There's an article on the Athletic that estimated it would take a 6-year, $144 million contract extension by the Braves. I want to say those are the exact numbers that I predicted back when I did my episode earlier in the offseason. But either way, that sounds about right. You got 2 more arbitration years, and that would take into account, paying him what the Braves owe him this year, which I think is around 12, 13 million. So taking those 2 arbitration seasons left into account, and then paying him 28 million a year for 4 free agent seasons. So I think that's a solid deal. I think that's probably market value. I don't think that's a huge overpay. I just don't think it's one the Braves are going to make, in my opinion. All right, next question here comes from Zachary Steele, who says, Anderson, I love this question, and I had to think about this a lot. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments, because I think it's a really good question. But he says, Anderson, Dodd, Elder, Schuster, Soroka, pitcher currently outside of the organization, so somebody, the pitcher the Braves may acquire, who gets the most starts, and how many of these get more than 5? I think this is a fantastic question. Again, one that probably the question I had to think about the most. 7 starters got 5 or more starts for the Braves last year. So you figure, hopefully, again, if everything goes according to plan, Fried, Strider, Wright, Morton, hopefully they're all getting close to 30 starts. So I will say whoever wins the 5th spot gets more than 5, and I think they get the most with probably 17. So if it's Schuster, I think he probably gets 15 to 17 starts. Only thing with that is because he is a rookie, I could see the Braves pulling the plug pretty quickly on Schuster if things aren't working out. So I'm already kind of backing off on that decision a little bit, but I do think whoever gets that 5th starter spot out of camp, they'll get at least 5 starts this year. I still believe Ian Anderson's going to get 5 or more starts. I just feel like at some point he's going to get a chance if he shows any kind of progress at Gwinnett, or if there is an injury in the rotation. I still think Anderson's going to get an opportunity. I'm going to say he gets 6 to 8 starts this year. And I'm going to be really, really optimistic here. And we got an update on Michael Soroka that we'll talk about later in the show. I'm going to say Soroka gets 10 plus starts this year. I'm going to say he gets 12 to 15. And I think that's highly, highly optimistic. But if he's healthy, I just think he's going to pitch well enough to be in the rotation. That may be back of the rotation, but I just feel like he's going to be in the rotation. And then I think Dodd and Elder both get around 3 to 5 starts. So I'll say Schuster, Anderson, and Soroka all get more than 5 starts, with Dodd and Elder getting less than 5, but getting, a handful of starts as well. But a really great question. I would love to know your thoughts on who you think gets the most starts and how many get over 5 starts. I think that's just a really fun question there. So great question from Zachary Steele. Next, Drew Ford asks, with the way Shoemake has looked this spring, do you think he gets a chance at shortstop if Grissom struggles early? So we've talked a lot about this here lately because of the rise of Shoemake and what that means for Grissom. We got another question. I think we're going to touch on this as well. Look, it's not out of the question that Shoemake could win the shortstop job out of spring training. Again, the Braves don't need the offense. They need somebody to play good defense, and Shoemake gives you that. He's already much better defensively at shortstop than Grissom is. Not that I don't think Grissom has gotten better. So it's not crazy to think Shoemake could get the job out of spring training. And it's not that Grissom has done anything wrong. Again, I think he's looked better defensively. I think he's going to hit. I don't worry about that. But I would like to see more of it from Shoemake. But if Grissom does win the job and Grissom struggles early, and in my opinion, he'd have to be a disaster defensively, and he'd have to be, really struggling at the plate for about a month, maybe more, for the Braves to just pull the plug on him that quickly. But I do think if that happens, that they won't hesitate going to Shoemake. I think he's at least shown you defensively, he's going to be above average. And then anything you can get from him hit-wise at the bottom of the order would just be icing on the cake. So, yeah, I don't think they'd hesitate in the slightest to go with Shoemake if Grissom does struggle. And, again, I don't think it's out of the question that Shoemake wins the job out of spring training. Next question from Cavs Buckeyes says, will the Braves heavily invest in DH post Ozuna, or will they use it as a revolving door for guys they want to give at bats to? Could Austin Riley be the full-time DH down the road? another good question, and I'm already getting excited about thinking about post Ozuna myself. I think all the money they have tied up to position players and possibly at that point some more pitchers if they do extend Soroka, maybe a Kyle Wright extension at some point. I don't see them spending a lot of money on a DH. I think it'll be more so of a revolving door. Now, this is one situation. If Shoemake does become the shortstop, DH could be a possibility for Grissom to keep his bat in the game. Again, I've talked about this, or at least I think I've said it on here. If not, I think I wrote about it over at Braves Today. And by the way, if you haven't followed Braves Today on Twitter, it's Braves_today. That's where I'm writing all my Braves content now. So make sure you go check them out. But I think perfect scenario for the Braves, Shoemake does become that shortstop. Even if he's just an above average defender that you hit 8th, 9th in the order. And then you can use Grissom in that Chris Taylor utility role where you start to work him into the outfield a little bit. He gives a player on the infield a day or two, and then you can use him in that DH spot. For me, that's a perfect best case scenario for the Braves. But as far as the DH going forward, yes, Riley seems like he'd be a good fit for that. I think ideally you'd want somebody in there that's just going to be a slugger, a good bat that you can put in the middle of the order. I think we're years away from that with Riley because I think his defense is still improving. But, down the road, it's a long deal that he has signed. I think that could be a good spot for him. But for now, post Ozuna, I see it just kind of being a revolving door. I don't think the Braves are going to spend a ton of money on that DH spot with all the other contracts they already have locked up. And Robert Mola says, do the players get paid for spring training and or per diem, or is it just considered a part of their annual salary? So players' contracted salaries don't start until the regular season begins. That's why during the COVID season, you saw a lot of prorated contracts because they only are getting paid for the days they're playing. And that's why it was a big dispute between the players and owners that season because the players were saying they're ready to go. They want to get paid. But the owners, kept kind of balking at that and shortened the season. They do get a per diem during spring training. So good question there from Robert. Got a lot of other really good questions to get to, including the one in the title. Who is the one player the Atlanta Braves cannot lose to injury this upcoming season? We'll discuss that next. Everyone's always looking for a great fantasy game to see how they would do as a GM. Could you be the next Alex Anthopoulos? Well, I got the game for you in the app that you need to download, and it's the Ultimate Pro Baseball GM mobile game. It lets you manage your own professional baseball franchise to try and build a World Series champion. And it's so detailed. You can manage everything from hiring the right coaching staff, managing team finances, scouting and drafting players, managing difficult personalities, navigating your franchise through free agency, and all the ups and downs of a season. All this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Baseball GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want, when you want. Really enjoyed just kind of playing this in my downtime. It's been a really fun game to play and makes you think a lot and kind of shows you a lot of what these GMs go through. And Lockedon Braves listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON in the game store. So make sure to check it out. Download the game. To download the game, just visit probaseballgm.com, scan the code, or look it up on the App Store. That's probaseballgm.com, Ultimate Baseball GM. Start your dynasty today. I had a big week on the podcast as we're gearing up for the 2023 season. A lot of preview content this past week. We looked at which prospects have impressed the most in spring training. And then we previewed the NL East. We previewed the Braves offense. We previewed the Braves pitching staff. So make sure you go back, give those a listen if you haven't. Next week, we're going to take a look at the prospects who could be traded this upcoming season if the Braves need to make an upgrade. And then I'm going to give you my biggest storylines for 2023. So we just have one full week left, and then we're getting into game week prep. So it is right around the corner. Opening day is coming up very, very soon. All right, jumping back into these questions. This one from Bellfire, who says, as we saw with the Mets, one injury can hit hard at any time. Who is the player this team can least afford to lose for an extended period of time? My vote would be Max Fried. I would agree with that. I would say Max Fried's probably my answer as well. I've seen some people in the chat, Jeffrey Humphreys, saying it would be devastating if Ronald were hurt again. It would be devastating for the fact that I would feel so much for Acuna if that were to happen. But the great thing about this Braves team is the depth, and it's not built around one player. And I see Georgia Bulldog Will chiming in. We cannot afford to lose Ronald Acuna Jr. And I agree. But the Braves also lost Ronald Acuna Jr. in 2021 and ended up winning a World Series without him on the roster. Alex Gonzalez has built a team doesn't rely on just one player. And I don't think there's one player on this team the Braves could lose. And if they keep everybody else, they couldn't still win a World Series. That's how much I think of this team. Ronald Acuna Jr. on offense for sure would be a huge loss because I'm expecting him to have an MVP season. But if he goes down, you still have Austin Riley. You still have Matt Olson. You still have Travis d'Arnaud and Sean Murphy behind the plate. You still have Michael Harris. You still have Ozzie Albies. I mean, it's still a very good lineup even without Ronnie. As much as I would hate to lose him, and I know the Braves don't want to and don't need to, obviously, I will say a lot of it depends on timing. You can't, and I think I said this on yesterday's podcast when I previewed the pitching for the upcoming season. When you get to the postseason, you cannot be without Max Fried and Spencer Strider. You need both of those guys healthy. You saw what happened this past postseason when both of those guys were not 100%, and the Braves just fell apart pitching-wise. You have to have those two guys healthy going into the postseason. They could lose one of those guys during the regular season, and there's enough depth in the starting pitching to get them through, but those two have to be healthy. They have to be dominant atop the rotation in order for the Braves to win a World Series. So while I think there's not one player the Braves could lose during the regular season that would just completely collapse them, I do think they can't go into the postseason and win without a healthy and dominant Max Fried and Spencer Strider. I see CW in the chat saying we cannot afford to lose Sean Murphy. Sean Murphy is going to be insanely valuable to our team this year. Yes, but they also have Travis d'Arnaud, who I think is also really great at handling the pitching staff. He is not nearly as good defensively behind the plate with the arm, but he does block balls great. He's a great pitch framer, and he knows how to handle this pitching staff. So again, even if they lost somebody to the level of Sean Murphy, they have somebody in Travis d'Arnaud who's been there, done that with this team. So there's insurance there as well. So I don't want to say that the Braves, could lose Acuna and it'd be just perfectly fine. Certainly some other players would have to step up. But as far as the regular season goes, I think the Braves could cover that. Now they start losing 2 or 3 of those guys, and then maybe we got some questions. But you're talking about what one guy could the Braves lose? I don't think there is that one player, at least for the regular season. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. All right, next question here comes from Drew Ford, who says, how many All-Stars do you think the Braves have this season, and who are they? I think the Braves have 5 All-Stars this upcoming season. I think Max Fried and Spencer Strider are both going to be All-Stars. I think Austin Riley makes the All-Star team again. I think Acuna makes it, and I think Michael Harris makes it, partly because I think he's still going to have a really good season, and also just because I think he's going to be a fan favorite, and I think he's going to get a lot of votes. He's just that type of player and personality. I could see Matt Olson getting it. First base is just really difficult in the National League. I could see Ozzie getting it because second base is not all that difficult, and Ozzie gets off to a hot start. I think he could make the All-Stars team. So I think there's as many as 7 players that can make it. You can make a case for Sean Murphy at catcher too, as an 8th. You could make a case for maybe Raisel Iglesias or AJ Minter as a bullpen. I think there's 9 All-Star caliber players at least on this team, but I'm going to say 5 make it. And I think it's Fried, Strider, Riley, Acuna, and Harris. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one as well. How many Braves players do you think make the All-Star team, and who do you think that will be? Bellfire also asked, at what point does Snitker getting talked about as one of the best managers in franchise history? He hasn't reached Bobby Cox level, but he has done a fantastic job with these players since taking over. And this is a great one as well. I can't remember if I talked about this here or if I did somewhere in written format, but Brian Snitker is not far away. I think I probably talked about this whenever he got his extension there in the offseason. He's not far away from being one of the best managers in franchise history. I think he's top 5. In fact, at the site that I used to write, I apologize. It was Tomahawk Take. They changed it to something else, and I apologize. I can't remember. But they did a best managers in franchise history, and they ranked Snitker 4th. So I think he's definitely top 5 in franchise history. He and Bobby Cox are the only Braves in Atlanta franchise history with over 500 wins. 3 other managers in franchise history have over 500 wins, but they were all with Boston. So I think he's pretty easily the second best manager in Atlanta franchise history, only behind Bobby Cox. And, he coaches out the rest of his contract the next 3 years, wins another couple division titles, maybe another World Series. I think he might be up there as one of the best of all time in franchise history. So I think he certainly has a good case. Stephen Buchanan says, with the possible emergence of Shoemake, what's the chance of Grissom moving to the outfield? So it's a question I was referring to earlier. And certainly with the emergence of Shoemake, as Stephen said, a lot of people are wondering what would happen with Vaughn Grissom in this scenario. In my opinion, you still, say if Shoemake were to win the job outright in camp, I still think you send Grissom down to AAA, let him continue to develop at shortstop, because who knows what's going to happen with Shoemake. We're talking about a 20 to 25 at-bat sample size in spring training that we're all thinking he could potentially be the shortstop of the future. I need to see it for months on months with Shoemake. I do think the defense is real, and that's, a great floor for him, but we got to see more with the bat, or long-term with the bat. So I would still send Grissom down to AAA, let him continue to develop defensively at shortstop. I would also start to sprinkle him in the outfield a little bit because of what I said earlier. I think best case scenario, Shoemake takes over that shortstop role and Vaughn Grissom moves into that Chris Taylor utility type role. But for the majority of 2023, I would still continue to develop Grissom at shortstop before I think about moving him into that utility type role. He's still just 22 years old. I have to keep saying that. He's still just 22 years old. So plenty of time for him to grow and mature defensively at shortstop. Coach Gordon Bombay says, how does the Diaz injury affect the NL East? I think it affects it a pretty good bit. I mean, Diaz is the best closer in all of baseball, and a lot of the Mets' success in their bullpen last year was based on Edwin Diaz. And it's not to say the other guys in there aren't good. They have Ottavino, they have Robertson, who has history as a closer. He has experience as a closer. So they have guys who can get it done. But I mean, last year, especially in the games against the Braves, if it got to the 8th inning and you were losing, you felt like it was game over. And it was almost became a mental thing when you played the Mets, that you knew you had to work hard to try to get a lead before the 8th inning, or you knew Buck Showalter was going to go to Edwin Diaz in that 8th inning to close it out. You don't really have that fear now. There's not a guy out there in that bullpen that you really fear to that level. So I think it changes things pretty significantly. Now, will Steve Cohen go out and get the best available reliever on the market whenever he can, as soon as he can? Yes, I think he will. He'll give it whatever prospects it takes. He's spent too much money on this team to let it just slip away based on one injury. But I think it changes things pretty significantly. I don't know if that makes me move the Phillies ahead of them, because I still had the Mets ahead of the Phillies. But I just, unfortunately, I think it's a huge change. And I hate that for Edwin Diaz. I hate that for the Mets as much as I hate the Mets. It's a big loss. And I think it changes things in the NL East. And then final question here from Georgia Sports Highlights. He says, how many games do you plan on seeing at Truist Park this season? So probably not that many this year. I have tickets to opening day, which the prices are astronomical, but that's the only game I'm guaranteed to go to right now. We are having our 3rd kid this summer in July. I know, poor timing, but I'm not going to have a lot of time to go to games, and probably not going to have enough much money to go to games either with the way that these prices are, but we'll probably at least make it to another series or two. If we can make it to, 6-7 games this year in the regular season, that'd be a huge win for me. It's just where I'm at right now with the family life and everything. So can't get over there as much. And living in Birmingham, it's a bit of it's a vacation. I mean, it's a travel for me to get to go to a game. So, there were times back in the day that I was easily going to 15, 20 a year, but now it's, if I can get to five or six games a year, that's usually pretty good for me. All right. Next, I want to get into Thursday's game notes and some news. I hinted at it earlier. We finally have an update on Michael Soroka. We'll talk about that next. It is March Madness. Maybe you've been enjoying some of the March Madness games on Thursday. I have not watched a ton. I would rather watch spring training baseball and college baseball. Some great college baseball action this weekend. Unfortunately, that's not on FanDuel, but I'm sure a lot of you are interested in the March Madness. You're interested in the NBA race as they get ready for the postseason. So you can go over to FanDuel, the America's #1 sports book app, because new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained this March Madness. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel today, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. That's what happens when I look away from my ad reads. I forget very quickly what I was supposed to say, but thanks for hanging in there with me. Thanks so much for making Lockedon Braves your first listen of each and every day. Again, if you're watching this live, I'm going to be going on Twitch right after that. If you want to come join me, shortstop or twitch.tv/shortstopball over there. All right. Thursday's game notes, not a lot. I said this to Georgia Bulldog Will when I got started here. I'm at that point of spring training where I'm over these practice games. I'm ready to get things going. I've seen pretty much what I need to see at this point. I think that fifth starter battle and shortstop battle are going to be interesting to watch down the stretch, but I'm ready for some real baseball. But on Thursday, Charlie Morton looked like 2022 version of Charlie Morton to me, and Coach Gordon Bombay had the great tweet or reply to me on Twitter, because it's exactly what I was thinking. The Charlie Morton script: look unhittable 66% of the time, back foot curveball hit by pitches, walks, and home runs the other 33% of the time. And that's exactly right. And that's exactly what we saw on Thursday. He looked dominant for the majority of the outing. He looked like vintage Charlie Morton, but then he had an inning where walked a batter, hit a batter in the back foot, gave up a 3-run homer. And then next thing you know, you look up, and it didn't happen in this start, but it was more so what we saw last year in the regular season. He's pitched 5+ innings, but he's given up 4 runs. And it just looked like the same Charlie Morton from last year. Now, I'm not worried about this. Charlie Morton's a veteran. He's in there to get his work in, but it just kind of funny, alarming, maybe a little bit, that it just looked like the same thing we saw in 2022, the way things played out. Colin McHugh made his spring training debut and threw 2 scoreless innings. So no real worry there about Colin McHugh. He is geared up and ready to go. And I think we'll see a lot of that this year with Brian Snitker using McHugh for multiple innings. I mean, his first spring training outing, and he goes 2 innings. Hilliard had a walk and a hit. Talked about it the other day, or wrote about it on Braves Today. Have an article on Braves Today you need to go check out, where I talk about how this competition for the outfield has created great depth for the Braves. And Hilliard, look, as great as Eli White has been, and he got another hit on Thursday as well, Sam Hilliard has been really good as well, and I think he's earned that spot. So he had a good day. And then the big news of the day in my mind is this from Justin Toscana of the AJC. Brian Snitker said Kyle Wright and Michael Soroka are both on the verge of making their Grapefruit League debuts in 2023. Wright threw 2 innings on a backfield on Wednesday, and Snitker said it went really well. Soroka has also progressed. Now, they say Soroka's close to making his spring training debut, but then they also don't say when he has thrown a bullpen or if he's thrown a bullpen. So I don't know how to read into that, but good update on them either way. I think they're slow playing Soroka there's no reason to rush him. He's not going to throw 150 innings this year. So I just think they're kind of slow playing it. Mark Bowman did say that Soroka did PFP drills on Wednesday. That's all we really know that Soroka has done at this point for a while. So, and that's good because, that's where he hurt himself initially. So him doing those pitcher fielding practice drills was a very important and big step for Soroka. But it sounds like we'll see Kyle Wright make a start next week. He should get 2 spring training starts and then be ready for that first series of the year. But I still don't know about Soroka. They say he's progressing, could make a start. I will leave it when I see it at this point. And then Jared Schuster gets a start against Boston on Friday. Now that he knows he is officially down to 2 in the running for that 5th starter job, we'll see how he performs on Friday. All right, I'm going to try to run through the chat section real quickly here. I was trying to read some of these as we were going. One Iron Lung says, I've seen this a lot after the Edwin Diaz injury, and I'm not completely opposed. What are your thoughts on the WBC being held after the season? I don't think players would like that. That's when a lot of players, take their downtime. I heard one idea, perhaps taking a 2 to 3 week break in the middle of the season, replacing the All-Star game and doing it then. Maybe that works, but I don't think teams would really want to stop. There's just no great time to have the World Baseball Classic. And that's unfortunate because I really enjoy it a lot. I think it's a lot of fun. I think other countries really enjoy it, and it means a lot to them. I think if you asked Edwin Diaz right now if he had any regrets about participating or if he would participate again, I think he'd say, I have no regrets and I would definitely participate again. There's no perfect time to do it. Marianne Smith, hey, Jake, do you think Dylan will be the 5th starter unless Bryce and Ian get going on the horse, or will they lose out? So Bryce and Ian have both already been demoted, so it sounds like it's down to Dodd and Schuster. And I think Schuster has the leg up just because he's pitched more at the higher levels, but I think it's going to come down to the last 2 starts for both of these guys for sure. Georgia Bulldog Will, I see Anderson getting the most starts. They want him to improve from last season, so they're going to have him on the mound a lot. Yeah, again, if there's an injury, I don't know. I mean, they waited so long with Ian Anderson last year. I think he made 20, 25 starts last year before they finally demoted him. But when he went down, I mean, it was done. There was no talk of bringing Ian back up, and he certainly didn't pitch like he needed to be brought back up. But the thing, they just demoted him so quickly this spring training, I think maybe they're just a little worn out on Ian Anderson. So I don't know, but I do think he gets, 5, 6 to 8 starts this year. But he's going to have to earn it at this point before he gets another opportunity. One Iron Lung, also, do managers have the power to prohibit players from participating in the WBC, or is that all on the player? I can definitely see them making that call. Any thoughts? The team definitely has a say in it, and they even have a say as to, how much they can be used. That's been a lot of talk that you've heard John Smoltz, discussing during Team USA games, is that DeRosa kind of has to leave. The manager of USA, Mark DeRosa, has to leave those pitchers out there to get their work in, even if they're struggling. And it kind of limits his ability as to how much he can manage in games. But teams do have a say in that. You'll remember during the offseason, there was a lot of thought the Braves weren't going to let Acuna play in the World Baseball Classic, but they got to look at him early on in spring training and, felt comfortable with him going over there. Blake Newsom, I'm just ready to hear the Chop versus San Diego at the home opener. I am as well. Can't wait to see that. Kyle says the worst loss I think would be Harris or maybe Murphy. Harris to any other center fielder we have would be a huge drop off, and Murphy would leave us in trouble on days TDA wasn't catching. I think that's a good point. I know CW had mentioned Murphy as well. The Harris one is a good call because then at that point, you may have to move Acuna back to center field, and I don't like that. I want Acuna just to go in right field, settle in, have a healthy year, and see what he can do. So I think Michael Harris is a pretty good call there because you saw last year at the beginning of the year when the Braves didn't have a good center fielder. I mean, Duvall was doing fine there defensively, but you saw how much that really hampered the Braves. And CW talking about Murphy being the one we can't lose and says, yes, Travis cannot catch over 120 games. And that's a valid point. Travis d'Arnaud's up in his his career now, he's probably not a guy that you want catching 120 times a game. And then that does put Chadwick Tromp in there a lot. So, yeah, I mean, losing Sean Murphy wouldn't be great, but Travis d'Arnaud can certainly handle it. I'm also thinking more postseason. I mean, I think they could survive the regular season with Travis d'Arnaud and Chadwick Tromp catching a lot of games if they had to. A guy named Nick says it would be great for baseball for a young superstar like Ronald to have a full healthy season. I cannot agree more. Can I please have one full healthy season of Ronald Acuna Jr.? Blake Newsom says, congratulations, Jake, on the baby. Georgia Bulldog will as well. Thank you so much. Going to be a busy summer for me, but you may see me take a bit of absence sometime in July. CW, if Senga is number 3 or 4 instead of a number 2 for their rotation, the Braves win the East easy, in my opinion. And CW also says, congrats. Hopefully one of them is a future Brave. We'll see. I got my oldest playing T-ball right now, and it's not going fantastic. I'm not seeing the future Brave in his future, but it's a lot of fun. But yes, going back to your point on the Mets, they lose. They're kind of in the same boat that I said with Fried and Strider. Braves need Fried and Strider to be healthy and dominant in the postseason to win. Mets have to have Scherzer and Verlander healthy and dominant in the postseason to win as well, especially now without Edwin Diaz. They lose one of those guys and Edwin Diaz is out. Then I agree with you. I think the Mets are in big trouble at that point. No, Bulldog Will, I did not see Auburn's game against Iowa, but while I was prepping for the show, I saw everybody and my family texting me saying War Eagles, so I assume that was a great finish there. Cletus says, any thoughts on Morton being a possible trade guy? Absolutely not. The Braves would keep him just for the sure value that he gives as a leader in the clubhouse. They're not going to trade him. And I think he's going to be fine this year. I don't want to act like I'm worried about Charlie Morton at all based on a spring training start on Thursday. It was just, again, somewhat mildly funny that it was the same thing that we saw from him all of 2022, where he looks dominant for 60-70% of the outing, but there's a one inning where he walks somebody, hits somebody, and then gives up a big home run. All right. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Lockedon Braves. Thanks as always for your support. Again, we're going to be going live on Twitch probably about 20 minutes after this. If you're watching live, if you want to come and join me over there for the Lockedon Braves after party, as we're calling it. But again, thanks for making Lockedon Braves your first listen of each and every day. Now go make your second listen to Lockedon MLB podcast, where MLB expert Paul Francis Sullivan brings humor, passion, and a unique perspective on every team, talking about the biggest stories from around the league. All right, again, thanks for listening. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at @Lockedon_Braves. Follow me on Twitter at @ShortstopBall. Also, make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe to the Lockedon Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast, and we will talk to you next time.